The old apartment building on the outskirts of town had always been a quiet place. Its inhabitants were accustomed to the creaking of floorboards, the sound of wind in empty hallways, and the echo of footsteps on long flights of stairs. However, in recent weeks, residents began to notice something strange. At night, sounds came from the basement. At first, it was a faint hum, barely audible among the normal noise of the house. But gradually the sounds became louder. Footsteps, as if someone was wandering across the concrete floor, scraping sounds like heavy objects moving, and sometimes quiet whispers, as if coming from the farthest corners. Mrs. Carter, an elderly woman from the first floor, was the first to raise the alarm. "Every night the same thing," she told her neighbors. "I hear someone walking right under my apartment." A young couple from the third floor went down to check the basement one day, taking a flashlight with them. The dark, damp-smelling corridors greeted them with a dead silence. Everything looked as usual. Old pipes, a pile of unnecessary junk that had accumulated over the years, and scattered boxes. They looked through each room, but found nothing strange. However, as they were returning to the stairs, they heard footsteps behind them. Turning around, they saw only emptiness, but the sound continued, as if someone invisible was following them. With each passing day, the number of complaints increased. People began to be afraid to go down to the basement even during the day. The sounds increased. Now they could be heard even on the upper floors. The doors on the landing creaked, the lights on the landings began to flicker, and one night one of the residents claimed to have seen a shadow in the basement moving on its own. Mark, a young guy from the fifth floor, was a man who did not believe in rumors. He considered all the neighbors' stories about the horrors of the basement to be nothing more than fantasies and exaggerations. One night, when the noise from the basement became especially loud, grinding, footsteps, and a strange hum, Mark decided to go down and check everything himself. Taking a flashlight, he quietly opened the door to the stairs and went down. The basement greeted him with cold and the damp smell that always lingered there. The narrow corridors, lit only by the weak light from the bulb above the stairs, looked like the scenery for an old horror film. As he walked further, he noticed that the air was getting heavier, and the sounds that had previously only been heard from afar were now heard very close. It was a strange whisper, many-voiced, drowning out itself. As he peered around the corner, the light from the flashlight illuminated something that took his breath away. In the back of one of the rooms, behind piles of old things, stood a group of people. They were dressed in strange, obviously ancient clothes, long dark cloaks, hats, gloves. Their faces were hidden by hoods, and their figures were illuminated by the dim flickering of candles standing on the floor. They stood in a circle and whispered words in a language that Mark did not know. It sounded like a mixture of low growls and ancient chants. Sometimes one of them raised a hand, as if giving a signal, and the others fell silent before starting to whisper in unison again. Mark froze, unable to look away, but as soon as he took a step back, his boot accidentally touched a lying pipe, making a loud metallic sound. The whispers stopped. All the figures turned in his direction at once, and now he could see their faces. Or, more accurately, the lack of them. The faces were indistinct, as if covered in thick shadow. Only the eyes, empty, black sockets, were directed straight at him. Mark froze, and at that moment one of the people, the tallest, slowly raised his hand, pointing at him. The whispers gave way to a low hum that began to fill the entire basement, vibrating in the walls and in his head. Mark felt his legs giving way. The hum filled everything around him, drowning out his thoughts. The people in the circle began to move toward him, slowly but inexorably, like predators driving their prey into a trap. "Who are you?" he tried to shout, but his voice dissolved in a heavy, vibrating sound. His flashlight trembled in his hand, and the beam of light picked out their approaching silhouettes every now and then. Their movements seemed smooth but unnatural, like shadows, subject to an alien will. One of them, the tallest, was the closest. His outstretched hand seemed to be made of something liquid like smoke or fog, and touched Mark's shoulder. At that moment, everything inside him contracted. Ill passed through his body, and then came the sensation of falling, as if he was being pulled into a black, viscous depth. There were only whispers around him, not just noises now, but words that were spoken directly into his mind. They spoke of darkness, of time that never moved, and of him being part of their circle now. Mark wanted to resist, but his body wouldn't listen. Shadows surrounded him, and the next moment he was gone, as if he had dissolved into the thick air of the basement. The next morning, the neighbors noticed that Mark's door was left open. No one had seen him leave, and despite all their efforts, his things were untouched, as if he had vanished without a trace. Since then, the nightly sounds in the basement became even louder. Now it was not only footsteps and hums, but also distinct voices. Sometimes someone could swear they heard Mark's voice calling from the depths of the basement. The tenants no longer went downstairs. Even during the day, the basement remained locked, but the whispers coming from there reminded D'Artagnan that it would never be truly empty.